Welcome. Hi. We have a dancer in the crowd, I can tell. She's got her ruby red slippers on. Well, it's good to be back. It still feels kind of fresh, right? I think we're in our 4th week back or something like that. I don't know. Got a lot of announcements today, so I'm just going to get to it. Newsletter will be out soon. That's being edited, and believe me, when I write most of it, it needs editing. The men's group will meet this week on Thursday from 9:30 to 11. That's men. There's senior pizza on that afternoon at noon. This week, the senior covenant group, if you define yourself as a senior, you're invited Tuesday 2 to 3:30 this week. Next week, the writing group meets on Wednesday, and if you want to come to that, we can meet on Zoom or live, and the topic is, what do you carry around with you like Jacob Marley in that classic Christmas carol? What is your baggage that you have pulled through life? Kind of a hard topic, but a rich one. After church today, just behind me on this wall is a series of tiles that people have purchased to be memorialized, and we're going to dedicate a number of people today, and a lot of them will also see, most of them will see images of, and I'll do a little eulogy for here today. But if you want to come to that service, it's a memorial, it's a dedication. I think of them as our ancestors. Today we're lucky to have the Osbornes doing the worship associate duties here, Catherine and Dale. They're not quite as colorful as the other Osborne family you might be famous with, but at least the dad has the same hair. Dale told me he grew out his hair to look just like Ozzy. Catherine's a lot better behaved than the kids in the show. Seekers this week, our Penny, who's right there in orange, has set us with our topic of to see what's out in front of us. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that, but that's our Seekers topic this week on Wednesday. That's not that's a live event, usually in here. So anyone who wishes to come, it's just sort of a conversation based on a theme, nothing terribly specific. 2 weeks from now, we're doing a service on a sort of a graduation adult theme, and in it, I've used this sort of imagery of tattoos. So we're going to have a couple people's tattoos we're going to project up here. So if anybody has a tattoo that they're willing to have shown, yeah, Chelsea, we got to get your shot for sure, and pick one, and we're going to broadcast them, and people are going to maybe make little tattoos on their bodies with some ink. So that's 2 weeks from now. Ollie Coker, who's been a longtime member of this church, you might remember Ollie. He's character, was in a wheelchair in the last few years of his life. If you know Ollie and you want to be a part of his service, 10:30 on June 11th at Green Hills, we're doing a service for him, and that's followed up by a luncheon here. Politically important news, next week we're going to have a town hall after the service. So we're talking about a budget, we're talking about this Spirit grant, we're talking about how money is going to be spent. So it's a precursor, it's a conversation that's important to have for the future of our church. And we're going to have an annual meeting on the 27th. So kind of the future of the church, particularly the budget for the next year and how that money gets spent, is an important part of what we're going to be moving forward. So those 2 meetings are important if you think of them next week and then the last Sunday in June. If you want to be on the board, we have a 9-member board of directors. We have a little, I get yelled at when I call it a slate, but there's a group of people who've already been sort of make sure we have those positions filled, but we're inviting anyone who wishes to run for the board, who has a vision for the church, to make sure that they get those into us by next week. If you have a little bio of who you are and then maybe what you'd like to see. As you can see, we're reasonably busy. We start RE next week sort of officially, so we'll have programming for the kids. I'm sorry about that today. We had stuff last week. I was away this week, didn't get a chance to pull things together, so I'm sorry about that. But moving forward, we'll give something for the kids to do. And as we sort of look at hiring a DRE, so we're in a little limbo, but we're going to provide programming. On the 19th, on Saturday, we start up with a book group. We've done this book before called Mistakes and Miracles. It'll be hosted by Vivian and a few people who've run through this book before. It's at 10 a.m., and that's in our we have a normal kind of adult ed slot. We're very likely going to fill that this coming week with talk about stewardship, but that's a little bit still in the works. Book group, Interior Chinatown. If you want to join what I think of as Robin Earhart's book group, that meets on Tuesday the 15th, but you can get ahead of time with that. Interior Chinatown is the name of the book. And this Friday, if anyone wants to come join me for sort of a PUC walk, we're going to meet at my house and we're going to walk the Strand and the Greenbelt in Hermosa. We're trying to get out and around to different spots so people can get to different sort of hiking things. So there's that. Before we start our service, let's take just a moment of silence, if you don't mind, in a service that will be filled with memorials of sorts. We just passed George Floyd's death this week, as you couldn't obviously probably have missed. This last year, 23 unarmed black people were either shot or choked to death by the police. In a year that we all know this has happened in years prior, and there was not so many eyes on it. So George Floyd, had reformed himself and said at one point to some friends that he was going to change the world, and obviously in a sad way he did, didn't he? So Breonna Taylor, you know the names, some of them anyway. 21 other universes this last year, calendar year, were wrecked, destroyed, their lives gone, their families, trust in community, trust between blacks and whites sort of broken. Let's just take a moment to honor that their lives lost are not going to be lost in vain, and that we, as an institution and as a people, as a country, remember that. Let's just take a second with that. That's our bell. Amen. Good reminder to turn your cell phone off, too. I'm going to invite Catherine up to read our chalice words, and I'm going to light our chalice.
Good morning. As our chalice words from Lorley Gorgas Halvan simply states it, birth is a miracle of love and courage, bringing light into the world. Death is a loss of light, but no less an act of courage. For we are born from and return to mystery. Thank you.
So today on Memorial Day, a holiday built originally for the memorial of soldiers, a holiday that in its roots has this cool story I'm not sure you're familiar with. It was a decorative day down south in Confederate country, and they would honor the dead soldiers from their side. And then about 3 years after, not long after the Civil War came to an end, they began to sort of unite the country by honoring all the soldiers. And Memorial Day is part of that testimony of us reweaving our differences back together. So we think about all those lives lost in the defense of our country, and all the courage it takes to do that act that we would like to put to rest, just like the Police Violence Act. But today, most of our time is going to be spent honoring our PUC ancestors here. Most of them will be strangers to you, but I want to, we started to talk about putting up, Tracy had come up with this brilliant idea of us doing kind of like a Oscars memorial, right, with the visuals that they do at the Oscars to the lost Hollywood stars. And then I started collecting bios from people, and I just sort of wanted to tell their stories, and because it's easy enough to forget people, right? We want to lift up their stories, and we want this to feel like a tribe. So we're going to tell a little bit of short bios of their services. We're going to see a picture of them. Some of this will extend out into the memorial tribute tiles. So that's what's going to happen today during the bulk of our service. And Severin, play us some music, would you? And we're going to get some singing, too. Yes!
This is Julie Hill.
Julie Hill. Who's to say that's true? Wow. I thought she was just a mom. I'm going to invite Gary up to do a testimonial from our, what we call the transition team. We fight about the name all the time. The transformation team, the TMT, the group that's been talking about race most fervently, and Gary's going to share his journey.
Hello, 1, 2. All right, it's working. First thing I have to say is I spent the last year coming up here every Sunday morning to film with 4 or 5 other people.
Yeah.
No, I don't need applause. What I want to say is it is marvelous to see your faces. Thank you for coming. We love this. It's much better than those little boxes on a screen.
Yeah.
Thank you all. All right, here we go. Hello, my name's Gary Hart. I've been a member of PUC for over 13 years and have served on various committees and on the board a couple of times. When I retired, I was looking for something I could get involved with that would be a productive use of my time and talent. After only 3 visits here, I found what I was looking for. Community, expression of faith without dogma, acceptance of all, and a healthy regard for the planet on which we live. I'm an atheist, as Susan said. But I'm also a spiritual person. I have rejected church for all my life because I thought it did more harm than good. And that may or may not be true, but it's what I believe. So I was surprised as anyone to find that PUC became so very important. Then about a year ago, in one of the many great PUC discussion groups, I realized that although I proclaimed my atheism, I was raised in a Christian culture. I always celebrated the Christian holidays, said pledge with God in it, without questioning, put my hand on a Bible and swore to tell the truth, and probably many other subtle practices that scream that this is a Christian culture. Okay, that makes sense. I'm an atheist swimming in a Christian soup, and that affects the way I see the life and the world. Yes, ma'am.
That's better.
As I participated in the deeper dive discussions over the last year on anti-racism, I loudly proclaimed that I'm not a racist. That's ridiculous. I'm not a racist. But after many discussions in this deeper dive into systemic racism, it became clear to me that I live in a white supremacy culture. White people can live wherever they want, they can shop where they want, they don't fear the police, and they get a myriad of other benefits given by a culture that is biased towards white folks. My whole life had been largely defined by the privileges I got for no other reason than being white. But wait, I thought, I was raised in a lower middle class neighborhood. It was probably 40% white, 30% Latin, and 30% Asian. How could this be a white supremacy world? Many of my close friends and schoolmates were Latinos, Latinas, and Asians. But that was in the 50s, and looking back, I see that most of these ethnic groups at the time were not really celebrating their differences, but were trying very hard to be white. I don't remember celebrating any ethnic holidays, practices, languages, or lifestyles. We were all just trying to get by, working hard for the American dream, which kind of assumed you were as white as you could be.
Yeah, that's true.
Not quite as multicultural as you might think it was. We have the opportunity here now at PUC to move more actively to embrace a multicultural perspective and work to widen the circle to move towards a diverse congregation seeking equality for everyone. We can take a giant step in this direction by using grant money we have been offered to expand the role of the DRE and by embracing and accepting the eighth principle. The proposed eighth principle essentially says we must work together for diversity and against racism and oppression. I think PUC has always been for working together for diversity and against racism and oppression. I think we only recently have started to understand what that really means. It's time we speak up more boldly. We also talk a lot about growing PUC to keep it strong. We seek to build our beloved community that is open and nurturing to all. And we need to start that work now. So what does that mean? The Deeper Dive Transformation Team will be bringing ideas about how to use the Spirit Grant, and we'll be bringing the eighth principle to the congregation so that we all understand what it means and to help PUC adopt this as our standard. And at some point, we will be asking the congregation to vote to accept both the budget that's being proposed and this new principle. UUs have always talked about being open to all who seek the community of peace, justice, and fair treatment for all. With this new effort, we can put those ideals into practice. I'm an atheist. I'm a Unitarian. I am learning to become anti-racist. Let's work together to make things better for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I'm going to invite Dale down. I want to invite all the kids to come down forward for our children's moment. Come down and sit on the rug here, if you don't mind. Andrew, future king of the world. Good. Good. Done. All right.
So, yes.
Super. Yeah. We got some kids here. Yeah. Woo! We did this into a... Ooh, that's probably me. That's usually me. Okay. So, I'm a big fan of Jesus. Maybe we're too close. And, he's my hero. He's not my savior. I don't think he was a man, but kind of I love his story. And there's an interesting story about what's a real leader. And when Jesus was about to get arrested, they were gathering around. The Roman soldiers were sort of just getting around, and they were going to arrest him, which they did, and they eventually killed him. But they started this debate, and there was one of the disciples said, "I would never betray you." There was a question as to who turned him in to the authorities, right? And people thought it was among his people, which was true. Judas turned him in. But it started this debate about who is the greatest among them, right? So just when the cops are sort of outside, that you can just think of them all yourselves. You guys are almost 12 disciples. You can think about if you were like the hero, you were arguing about who was the closest to the hero and who was the most loyal to the hero while they're in trouble. And so they're battling, and one says, "I would never turn you in. I would never I'm the greatest of them all." And they start fighting with one another about which one's the greatest disciple to Jesus.
And in my opinion, this is a stupid time, a really stupid time for Jesus' followers to get an argument about who's the greatest.
Right.
I mean, Jesus is about to be arrested. He could be put to death. Shouldn't he be trying to figure out who is going to turn Jesus over to the military police? I really get the impression that these followers of Jesus are a little bit clueless.
So that's how it gets written in the Bible, and Jesus says something to the effect of this, right? He says, the kings of the Gentiles, or the normal people in power, right? He goes, they know very clearly who is the greatest, and they want to lord power over other people. That's the way that many powerful people express their power, as they take advantage of it. He says, though, but that can't be true for you. When you're a disciple of mine, you have to be the one like the least, like the youngest, like the one who serves. The leader among you is the one who serves, Jesus says.
And Jesus goes on to say, when you see someone who gets to sit at the table and be served by someone else, who do you think is the greater? The one who sits at the table or the one who serves? You probably think it's the one who sits at the table, don't you? But Jesus says, I always try to act like someone who serves at the table, not like someone who sits at the table.
And that's our message today, really, basically. And you know that you'll know it among your friends, too. You'll see it, like the people who are most loyal to each other and of service, they're the ones who really draw the leadership from the other people, right? You can only sort of bully people so much, eventually they will turn on you. And the real act, one of the things in this church that you can be so many different things. We do say to our kids and to all of us that we really want to be of service in improving the world. Sort of Jesus calls us to that act. We call ourselves to that act in our own individual ways. We all have different skills, and we all try to serve one another, and that is really where the heart of true leadership is. So go be leaders in the world as you grow up by being of service to others, and that is the greatest. Is that right? Yeah. That's right. There we go. So next week we'll be going out somewhere, but right now you can go back to your seats, and thank you for coming. And we're going to do joys and concerns. Leanne's going to come up and give me a hand with that, and give you a microphone just so you have one in case you need it. Leanne likes to yell at me for missing things, so I want her to make sure that that's public. So we're going to keep the touchiness of the service down. We're going to probably return to that. So does anybody have a joy or concern they want to stand and share, and I'll repeat them so we all hear them in case you... But anyway, let's just take a moment to acknowledge all those unacknowledged joys and concerns that live in all of our hearts here. People who are grieving, let's just pause for that moment. We're going to follow that with a prayer from Dale up at the pulpit.
I share with you a prayer called Each Breath, written by Leif Seligman. We pause in the stillness to rest for a moment, to quiet ourselves so that we can feel what stirs within us. Each breath draws us closer to the pulse of life, and with each exhalation, we make room for something new. May we encounter patience along our growing edges and compassion in our most tender spots. Here may we find the inspiration and encouragement we need to face our challenges and nurture ourselves. And in the presence of suffering across the globe, may we redouble our efforts to practice kindness where we are, with the hope that the light of our actions travels like the light of faraway stars. May our gestures of compassion and generosity seed possibility. May we walk humbly with one another, choosing reconciliation over resentment as we try to live right-sized. When life presses in and shifts us off balance, when pain assails us, when frustration mounts, may the rhythm of our breath steady us and bring us back to a place of gratitude and love. Amen.
So pretty. I'm going to start in with some bios, people who you probably, some of you will know, most won't. This is not a fancy service where there's some crafty title that, gets played into some thoughtful thing. This is just the stories of the people who precede us. So, the first person is Fiona Knox. Many of you might remember Fiona, some of the older generation. She was here up to a decade ago, a very active member of this congregation in terms of social justice. Raise your hand if you remember Fiona. Yeah, a lot of us do. I don't think I ever met her. She was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She majored in sociology. She came west to San Francisco, went to Berkeley. She was hunting for a job and became the office administrator for the Berkeley Unitarian Universalist Church, who worked with was the director of the West Coast UU churches at the time, so she was connected. She loved that job. She worked there for about 5 years and was hooked as a UU. She wasn't a UU as a kid. She left Berkeley for a job where she worked with women in the Army, where she worked with other women in the overseas service during World War II and after. She hung around quite a bit with Elvis Presley, who was there at the time. And then she married her husband named Doug Knox, and they traveled around Europe together. She returned to the States and went to college to become a social worker here in LA. She went to USC for a degree, became an elementary school teacher. And after those credentials, taught in Torrance for 19 years. As she stopped teaching, she became a full-time volunteer with the UU Service Committee. In her role there, she led protests. She was involved with, particularly, she met Cesar Chavez, and they were involved in a lot of the protests there. She lost her husband, and then she married Dick Luba, who she met at Antioch College. And I want everyone at the end of these to just say, Fiona, we remember you. Thank you. Joyce Block Miller is our next person. 2 years ago, she died in her Bay Area home like so many PUC members. There's tons of folks here born in Chicago. She developed an early love of music and ballet, as we have a long history of the arts here. She graduated from high school there and attended the University of Michigan. She got a degree in speech therapy. I'm going fast because we have a few. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. During her college years, she met her first husband, Kenneth Block, and they were married, lived in Evanston, Illinois. And she began her career working in special ed. She was a proud mother of a number of boys, Jeffrey, Doug, Craig, and Andrew. Many of us remember some of them. She loved being a mother and moved to PV Estates in her 30s and got a degree in communication disorders. And she supported the Stroke Association in the Long Beach area, was a real champion of people who had had strokes. Lover of the arts, went to the Philharmonic Orchestra in LA. In '85, she married Victor Miller, and they danced and traveled overseas. After Victor passed away, Joyce kept traveling. From the early 90s to 2017, she was here and a very active, serving on a ton of PUC committees. Everyone, Joyce, we remember you. Most all of us who aren't real new will remember the next person, Godfrey Purnell. He really needs no summary to most of us. He was widely known for his political engagement in the area. He died just 13 days short of his 99th birthday, which became an annual party that we threw here for him and with him. He was the oldest son of Russian immigrants, and he was born in Boston. He made me go hunt down his house on one of my trips home. And he grew up in Chicago, and funny enough, he and I lived in the same neighborhood within a few blocks of each other. I lived there for just a year. He grew up there. So he would tell stories when I would visit him about where he lifeguarded, and I would know where that was. That was cool. He became a city council member, and he served multiple terms as the mayor of the city up at the top of the hill there. He's a lifelong advocate for labor unions. He was a progressive, and he created the first prepaid dental program insurance company in the country. And he helped kitchen union workers have dental insurance. So Godfrey was an amazing sort of entrepreneurial spirit and person with this. He had this great logo, "Do Good Stuff," if you remember Godfrey. He basically was one of the champions of the preschool, which we now have, Pacific Sage. And he was a model of just how to live an active life. He never stopped learning. He never stopped trying new things. He always was a sculptor. He was a pilot. He had the coolest house around. Godfrey, we remember you. Doris Penalosa, I never met. She passed away this past December in McKinleyville, California. She was born in D.C., and she was studied to be a nurse. California came into Doris' consciousness when she took a trip with her sorority sisters. In 1957, she met her husband, Richard Bruce, on that trip. Excuse me. Thank you. She was quite a cook and an animal lover, and had a lot of parties. And she married Fernando Penalosa, a sociology professor in Cal State Long Beach, her second husband. Around the time she became a choir member here, she was in charge of a lot of maintenance projects here at church, and she took up writing and became quite an accomplished painter of watercolors as well. Doris, we remember you. Dwayne Higgins was born on St. Patrick's Day in Faith, South Dakota. Many of us would remember Dwayne. What a cool name for a town, Faith, South Dakota. He was the grandson of a homestead farmer, and he was the son of a blacksmith. He was a real sort of earthy upbringing. But he moved to the city when he was in his teen years, and he attended Santa Monica College, and he studied art, which was his love. He trained with this renowned artist named Boris DeSouch at the Otis Art Institute, and just kept taking lessons his entire life. A responsible and caring family man, he supported his wife of 65 years as a graphic artist and in the art department at the airplane companies like Douglas Aircraft and then Hughes Aircraft. He did some of the designs of what these planes and craft would look like. And he continued to do colorful scenes in his Harbor San Pedro home. And he was a member of the San Pedro Art Association, and he was a volunteer teacher for about 20 years, earning tons of special awards for all his work in the community school down there. Dwayne was always creative in singing, had a love of books, and a friendly, creative spirit, and a kind and generous nature. He was a sweet man, if you remember Dwayne. So, Dwayne, we remember you. Mildred Ann Gilman is how most people would remember Ann. I only met her once. Anne was born in L.A. in dramatic fashion, an at-risk kind of way. Before her mother was discharged from the hospital, her father took her 2-year-old brother and vanished. Her mother took her back to Virginia, and she grew up in and around D.C., living with her mother and her other mothers, her aunts, who were nearby. In 1941, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, she dropped out of school, lied about her age, and went to work for the American Red Cross. One day on a bus across the country, a man in an Army Air Corps uniform, beside her, she pulled out an empty pack of cigarettes. He got up out of his seat, told the driver not to leave, went back and bought her a pack of cigarettes, and they became married ever since. They were married until he got shipped overseas, and he died 53 years later. Our Ann was the first advice columnist for the Los Angeles Times-Mirror. She wrote a column called Dear Jane Palmer for 7 years, and then she retired to raise her children. And she was the first female Commodore at the Buccaneer Yacht Club in San Pedro. She worked as a legal secretary. She was a member here for many years, and she retired and lived at Harbor Terrace. Georgianne would remember her, and many of us, I can tell by the voices, remember Anne. So there we go. Anne, we remember you. Ollie, who I mentioned earlier, passed away peacefully at the age of 98. Ollie was a character. That's the simplest thing to say about him. He will have a graveside service, like I said, on June 11th at 10:30. When he was born in Texas. And then his father was in the Navy, and they traveled around a bunch, and he started high school in San Pedro before his father retired, and they moved the family back to Texas. At age 15, he hitchhiked his way back, left his family to hitchhike his way back to San Pedro, made it. This is all before interstate highways and the such. was dragged back home to Texas by his family and hitchhiked again this next year back to San Pedro. That's Ollie. He was a gunner in the World War II and on a training mission when Ollie was playfully going to write his name in the water in bullets when they were just over a still lake or something. He suddenly accidentally shot up the wing of the plane and they had to emergency land the place. He almost got court-martialed, but he talked his way out of that. Ollie went to graduate from USC on the GI Bill, and he went back to San Pedro, who he had hitchhiked to go to finish his high school at, and he was a modern science and chemistry teacher there for 25 years. Jolly Ollie was his nickname at that time. If you know Ollie, you might remember him saying, "Coker's my name and poker's the game." And he played in a game for about 3 decades with other PUC members, Bill DeClerc, and Ollie was a legendary flirt, a mischievous character, and an impressive bird watcher who had what they call a life list, and a very impressive one. Ollie, we remember you. Samuel French and Barbara French's husband have been members here since the 60s. Samuel was a loyal husband, family man, active tennis player, but he also happens to be one of the world's leading pathologists of liver disease. He had a memorial service just about a month and a half ago here. We filled this room to probably above COVID capacity 2 months ago for his memorial service, and there may not be, honestly, anyone who's been a part of this community. I'm exaggerating because I don't really know, but there's really no one who was probably better at what he did than Samuel was at being a pathologist. World-renowned, traveled, had something like 400 published articles in his field, and a fabulous husband and a great family man. And Sam, we remember you. Oh. Betty Foss, as she's known, Drew's mom, was born in 1925 in St. Paul, Minnesota. She passed away just a couple years ago in Lomita. We're honoring the 2 years of folks here because of COVID. We didn't get a chance to do this before. She lived on a farm during the Depression. She graduated from college at McAllister in St. Paul and worked as a secretary before starting a family. She moved to California's Central Coast with her first husband, John Davis. In '61, she attended Cal Poly San Luis Obispo for graduate school, got a teaching credential, taught there before moving to LA, and she taught at the Eucalyptus School in Hawthorne. With her second husband, Barney Foss, Betty shared a love of travel, playing bridge and tennis, reading, hosting parties. She was a beloved social member of this church. For many years, she held many positions. She was also the president of the board at one time, and I know Drew, obviously, and the rest of us. Betty, we remember you. William, or Bill DeClerc, is the former husband of our own Georgianne DeClerc, and he is the father of Erica Sweet, who designs the tiles for us and kilns them, if you'll see those later. Worked her tail off. She's a high-end person in the hospital system, a physician's assistant, and dropped a lot of what she had to do to make the tiles for us in short notice here. So he was born in Belgium, Bill was, passed away on February 3rd. He moved to California in '62, became an instructor at the Dana Junior High School in the '60s, and then San Pedro High for almost 30 years. He was threatened with job termination because of his involvement with the Harbor Area Citizens for Peace, one of the many people involved with the peace movement in this church, and being an activist, always vocal about his opinions, never shy to share it. He retained his teaching position and in '81 received the National Golden Key Award in Atlanta, Georgia. After he retired, he served as the president of the PVB Lions Club, and he was just an anti-war activist his entire adult life, an environmentalist, a big, bold thinker. He supported logic, and he wrote this in his own little bio-eulogy obit, supported logic over magic and encouraged conservation of our fragile planet. Bill was concerned with overpopulation and also with quality education and rational skepticism, a classic UU. He applied scientific principles talked about harmful superstitions, and Bill, we remember you. Virginia Schwartz, or Ginny Schwartz as she was known, was a member back in the 90s. She was a regular support in our office and a part of the social fabric of this life. She was born in 1928. You have a good chance of living a long time if you come here. I don't know if it's the water or what it is, but it's something. And she had a good life. She said at her last words were, "I've lived a good life." She had an independent spirit. She decided to leave the cold winters of Minnesota, moved to sunny California. It was a different world. She remembers being shocked to see a woman smoking on the street when she got here. She first lived in Hollywood, probably where she saw that, and eventually ended up in Inglewood. She never stopped visiting new places. She was always the driver, and her husband would sketch passing scenery. She visited Europe and Israel and China and Russia, just an avid traveler, and she was thought to be very kind and thoughtful of other folks. She also had a sense of humor. She glowed with her face when she told a story. I'd have never met Virginia, at least if I have, it was a very short time. And she hosted sort of famous dinner parties and cast for the Inglewood Playhouse, so she had a theatrical background. She enjoyed music, dancing, playing the piano. And her husband, Julius, we just sold a number of his paintings, and they could probably still be purchased there. They moved south of here, and they're very active we're in the South Bay Fellowship, which is down in Redondo Beach, a smaller community of UUs that also still meet. And she was a secretary at El Camino College. Ginny, we remember you. Mal Vergy was, with his wife, Linda, longtime members here, very close to Al Hendrickson, the former minister. Mal died last fall peacefully in his home and with a traditional Zoroastrian burial ceremony, as much as COVID would allow. He was born in India from a fairly privileged family, but he was one of 8 siblings, and his parents lost their lives early in their life, and he sort of lost out on that privilege and became very much a self-made man. He worked as a sailor's apprentice in India, saved enough to scramble a ticket to get to England. He ended up becoming a captain of a British merchant navy ship, for which he got a pin from the Queen he was quite proud of. He got a master's degree. He worked for Lee McGee, one of the congregation's founding members here. And then he was employed with Lloyd's of London. Just an interesting life and a fascinating guy. Mal and Linda joined PUC in 1967, the year I was born, and have been back for the last 3 years here. Mal was a man of the sea who turned into a gardener and grew amazing rare fruit. They have a great house on the sort of San Pedro side of the hill here. He played in these poker groups, one with Bill DeClerc and Ollie. Mal and Linda went on something of a blind date and were married 6 weeks later. So Linda's here to hear that too. So Mal was cool, and Mal, we remember you. Ethel, or Echo Davis, is a name many of you will remember. She just died in 2019 from pneumonia. She was born in Dayton, Ohio. She was the 6th of 8 children. She grew up and she went to Denison University. Shortly after college, Echo made it here and worked at the Torrance school system as an elementary school teacher. She was a reading specialist. She married Perry Davis and spent a life traveling and entertaining together. She was quite a pianist, apparently, and beloved by her many nieces and nephews. She was a big supporter of Heifer Foundation, Doctors Without Borders, very supportive of these progressive causes. Echo, we remember you. Chuck Curtis, a gentle soul, sang in our choir up to his death on Halloween night in 2018. You might remember Chuck often wore like an Irish cap and was full of jokes. He was a funny man. He loved a good pun. And I think of Chuck most strongly as not only being a member of the choir, but he was one of the initiators of a year-long world religions program that we had last year. And Rose, his beloved wife, is here today, and we honor Chuck. Chuck, we remember you. Georgianne Coughlin, I couldn't find anything about her. Georgiana Coughlin passed away, and I hunted pretty hard for photos, and there we go. Georgianne, we remember you. Having heard a sea of bios of deceased members, we could have a heightened sense of what it takes to be here. Yes. She's going to be on our tile. This is Pat Schull's daughter. We weren't going to do non-members in the service, but Pat was an active, good daughter and an active person in 1,000 volunteer groups, lived up north. Died tragically in a very strange and sad way. She was sort of thrown from a golf cart and hit her head and died immediately. But very involved in a lot of communities. We'll tell her story in just a minute. You might have a heightened sense of what it is to be here. Some just very cool people that have passed before us. If you have a culture about life and death, it's simply that your life matters and that you should behave accordingly. We've just finished a 6-week series on death and dying to return to the end, to the truth that the obvious fact that you're going to die does not come with an obvious natural response to it, does it? You can live your life a whole ton of ways. We've always known that the stakes of death were high, too big to sort of deal with just rationally. And to funnel the question, I was sort of thinking to myself, if you funneled the question of given death, how one should live into a computer, it would probably smoke like it were in a cartoon. You can say, I'm aware of the truth of it, and then choose to ignore it. You can know your body, and with it, believe your mind is going to go away and not break free of the fear of that. You can get that life is fragile and choose to live recklessly without a seatbelt, so to speak. You can digest fully that you're going to pass away and dedicate your life to sacredly soak up every bit of your time. You can choose to worry about your genetic propensity for colon cancer and eat Brussels sprout smoothies for the rest of your days. Every response, more or less, has its own wisdom and foolishness, doesn't it? Whatever response anyone has towards death in their life will be driven by deep-seated emotions that the person taking them on will probably not be fully aware of or understand they're even driven by, right? All of us, that's true. So when you become a member of a Unitarian church, you probably don't expect promises. You don't get too many paved golden roads here. You don't hold yourself to not being a bigot, to care about the environment, to choose to stretch your heart, to believe in the broadening of liberties to the people who are been left from those liberties. You didn't come to a church not to be able to sort through this in your own way. You get to sort what you came with from your own religious heritage. You get to chuck what you want. You have to work that out for yourself. I suspect that you came to be a part of a community that earnestly asks itself, how can I be a moral person on my own terms? And you look through the list of people we just had, being a member here is open to all. We don't screen people for their level of success, for race, for creed, or education, or sexual orientation, or any criteria, really. Truth is, if you hang around here long enough, 4 or 5 months, show up on events and Zoom classes, find your way into participating in a few social events, and you do not behave like a jerk, one of the Judys, either spelled with a Y or spelled with an I at the end, will probably invite you to a little membership class. If nothing gets in the way of that and you don't run away too fast, you will soon enough be signing a book that looks like you just stepped off the Mayflower. If you looked at it as being a challenge to become a member here, it's really not that hard. We just introduced an impressive dozen or so people just a few months ago who will lead us forward into the future. But even if it's easy to become a member here, what it takes to stay is a little bit different usually. Being a good Unitarian is different. It's a high standard to aspire to, I think. And the legacy of the leaders and successful people that UU churches, this one in particular, but all of them produce, is pretty rich. So, we harbor this history of harboring leaders, and we harbor this new understanding that some of that legacy of leadership rests on a certain kind of privilege, and it rests on the obligation to look honestly at who you are. And I'm going to close my little tearful speech here when I think about people I haven't even met hardly, truthfully. I'm going to invite up, Catherine's going to read A Life That Matters, which I read at a lot of memorial services. They're going to read it together, Dale and Catherine. Thank you.
Ready or not, someday it will all come to an end. There will be no more sunrises, no minutes, hours, or days. All the things you collected, whether treasured or forgotten, will pass to someone else.
It will not matter what you owned or what you were owed. So too your hopes, ambitions, plans, and to-do lists will expire. So what will matter? How will the value of your days be measured?
What will matter is not what you bought, but what you built. Not what you got, but what you gave. What will matter is not your success, but your significance. What will matter is not what you learned, but what you taught.
What will matter is every act of integrity, compassion, courage, or sacrifice that enriched, empowered, or encouraged others.
What will matter is not your competence, but your character. What will matter is not how many people you knew, but how many will feel a lasting loss when you're gone. What will matter is not your memories, but the memories that live in those who loved you.
Living a life that matters doesn't happen by accident. It's not a matter of circumstance, but of choice. Choose to live a life that matters.
Amen.
That's it. That is our theology right there. There was this elderly Polish man, he was dying in his bed. And he was suffering the agonies of that often happens. He suddenly smelled this aroma of his sort of favorite pierogi with fried onions sort of wafting up the stairs. And he gathered all his remaining strength. He sort of hauled himself out of bed and he gripped the rails and he made it down the stairs, leaned against the door frame, gazed into the kitchen where he would have just felt like he was in heaven. It was a last sort of moment. Spread out on wax paper across the kitchen table were hundreds of his favorite pierogis. Was it heaven? Was it one last act of love from his wife of 60 years, seeing that he left the world as happy a man in these last few days of his? He threw himself towards the table, sort of struggling to get there. He landed on his knees in this crumpled posture. He parched his lips, waiting for this taste of this pierogi. He was able to struggle to get one to his hand. Then he reached up to the edge of the table, and his wife smacked him with a wooden spoon and said, "Back off, those are for the funeral." Give more generously than that. Please give generously for our offertory. All right. Bob Monzingo on the second piano there, he describes himself as mean as nasty as ever, but plays pretty nice, actually. Not nearly nasty and mean at all. This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together. In spite of time and death and the space between the stars, we pause in a silent witness to that great unity. May the blessing of love be upon you. May love's peace abide with you. May love's presence illuminate your hearts now and forevermore. So be it. Amen. Shalom, salam, namaste, and blessed be. And as the Quakers say, and now our service truly begins.
Please welcome Cynthia Rowe.
New member.
Yes. We're going to do a piece by Benjamin Goddard, who French composer, lived in 1849 till 1890 something.
Thanks, Cynthia. All right. Go. But at 12, we're going to do the tile ceremony, so if you want to stay for that, come around the back. Oh, did I grab your mask? Maybe I did. I have a mask. Is that yours?